Because of the following special program, Mr. Merlin will not be presented this evening.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress with you. I'm happy to welcome Mathew Klickstein back to Word Balloon, a guy that I've helped with his projects, and he's helped with mine. Good to see you, Matthew.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me on again. It's always
Absolutely.
Great to be on.
Well, you always have fun things to talk about, man. Cooking. And I know right now you are taking pre-orders for a very cool book that you are releasing that is a series of issues, or pardon me, a series of interviews with the man from Trauma, Lloyd Kaufman. Tell me about this book.
Yeah, so I would imagine most people listening to your podcast or watching here know who Lloyd Kaufman is, or at least Trauma. It is the longest independent film studio ever, and started in the late 70s. Lloyd Kaufman had been doing some stuff before that, but that's really when Trauma got off the ground. And of course, they're probably best known for movies like The Toxic Avenger, Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD, Surf Nazis Must Die, all different kinds of films. They also distribute and have executive produced a lot of films like Trey Parker and Matt Stone's first big project, Cannibal the Musical. And they're still making movies even today. Lloyd, getting into his 80s, just wrapped on his latest film that will probably be announced soon. And, they're always making documentaries. And Lloyd, of course, also travels around the country and the world talking about how to become a filmmaker with his Make Your Own Damn Movie lecture series that's very popular. And lastly, he's also well known for being kind of the next step as far as after someone like a Russ Meyer or Roger Corman, John Waters, that kind of world. But very much like a Roger Corman, Trauma has been a real launch pad for not just people like Trey Parker and Matt Stone, but obviously James Gunn started at Trauma, still puts Lloyd in the background of a lot of his movies. We had a kind of a funny little moment on another interview where someone asked Lloyd point blank if he was going to be in the new Superman movie that James just finished. And Lloyd said he signed an NDA, so he can't say it. Of course, we all went, well, if you signed an NDA. But anyway, so, Eli Roth is another one, and plenty of other filmmakers who either started with Trauma or tertiarily were involved with Trauma, or just, were really looking up to Trauma when they were young and getting started, like Quentin Tarantino's always talked about that, or people along those lines also. So what this book is, real quick, is the University Press of Mississippi, which is, of course, a university academic press. They've been doing this long-running series for the last 25 years called Conversations with Filmmakers. They also do one with authors and comic book people. And I was shocked to see that they haven't done an installment on Lloyd Kaufman yet, considering how important he is to the film world, as we were just talking about. So I spoke with them. This was about almost 3 years ago now. And we went back and forth with discussing how that would work out. And they decided ultimately to do it. And really what it is it's a series of previously published interviews with Lloyd from over the last 50 years, all around the country and all around the world. Some of them were translated, all different kinds of publications, from the New York Times and LA Times to punk zines to different kinds of blogs. I even had some podcasts transcribed. We have Lloyd did a kind of a famous video a few years ago with James Rolfe, known as the Angry Video Game Nerd, and we were able to get permission to transcribe that. A podcast he did with Chris Gore, a Film Threat. So all different kinds of people coming from all different kinds of media, and the book is a collection of those. I also work to annotate them, to fact check them, to do a little bit of quiet editing, and it includes a few other special features also. I did a scholarly intro about Lloyd. I did an interview of my own with him. and a few other things like that as well. And they'll be coming out through paperback and hardcover as well as ebook through University Press of Mississippi in February. You can order it wherever you get your books, whether it's bookstores or Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com or directly from the publisher. And I'm going to be doing a few little events and things as I tend to do, mostly local where I am right now in the Denver, Colorado area, but probably a few things nationally also. We're talking with Alamo Drafthouse about doing some movie screenings. We actually might be doing something in your own fair Chicago. There's a lot of trauma people out there, so we're talking about that right now. So people can stay tuned to that on my website, www.mathewklickstein.com. And yeah, that's what that book is.
That's great, man. You hooked me up with Lloyd last year, and I had a fantastic conversation with him.
Great.
And I have tremendous respect for him. How long did it take for people to recognize, Lloyd as a filmmaker and not just dismiss him as Schlockmeister?
Well, that's a really good question, John. No one's actually asked that before. And I've worked with and have been chronicling Lloyd and Troma and been kind of sort of part of the Troma scene, as so many of us are, for more than half my life now. So I've really gotten to know him well. I've traveled with him. I've been involved with Troma Dance, which is Troma's answer to Sundance, which they actually used to do in Park City at the same time as Sundance. Now it's kind of more of a traveling show. So I've heard so many different questions and heard so many people talk with Lloyd about things. And of course, going through all these interviews over the last few years and getting them compiled for the book, that's a question I've actually not seen or heard anybody ask. And it's funny for two reasons, because one, Lloyd actually sees himself as a Schlockmeister. He actually appreciates schlock. And indeed, he's also very in touch with his Jewish culture, as am I. And schlock actually comes in some regard from a German, slightly Yiddish word that basically means trash. And Lloyd actually sees a lot of what he does proudly as something of trash cinema. In fact, in one of the interviews that we had in the book, he talks about how there was in France, they laud him, they lionize him for being a trash cinema guru, and he appreciates that. It's very similar. You probably saw or heard this. What comes to mind is when Alan Moore was talking about his work on the book with Melinda, Lost Girls. He was very adamant in telling people, no, this is pornography. And I think it's important that we refer to it as such, because there's almost a class issue there of, I don't want to say erotic literature or erotica, I want to say pornography, because that's really what it is. There's a certain authenticity there. And again, a certain kind of working class, kind of pride to that. And I think Lloyd has some of that. It's really in some ways no different than calling himself punk or connecting himself with that world, which he's done very much over the last few decades. So he would probably refer to himself, and has more or less, obviously jokingly sometimes, but I think seriously, he's proud of the fact that he creates schlock. That's really what it is. Again, you look at someone else that he's also, inspired by and was friendly with, Herschel Gordon Lewis, same kind of thing where, Herschel Gordon Lewis, embraced the fact that he was seen as this kind of splattermeister, and, he created the whole genre and idea of gore. And that's part of the game. I mean, Troma really got its start in more ways than one with distributing the film Blood-Sucking Freaks back in the early 70s. And that movie is the quintessence of schlock. It's also a lot of fun. It says a lot about our culture. I think it's very smart. It's very lurid. It's obviously extremely graphic. It's extremely irreverent. It's extremely contrarian. It's extremely anti-authoritarian. It's all the things that Lloyd believes in and that Troma believes in. And at the same time, you could jokingly and laughingly look at it as kind of a crappy, not even a B movie. But again, those are the kinds of films and projects that even people like Herschel Gordon Lewis or the Cougar Brothers or Russ Meyer or Roger Corman or even, early John Waters, what they were actually ascribing to. And they wanted to make films in that regard. And I think that goes all the way back to, Susan Sontag writing about kind of early sort of B movies and disaster films and her notes on camp, of course. And, the fixation that people have on some of these early science fiction movies and the fun that they had with them, Bill Warren's work and Bill Shelley's work and people like that. So it all comes under the same aegis of of actually appreciating that as its own genre, as its own art form. And that's why I'm actually really proud that this is really the first true definitive academic text on Lloyd Kaufman and Troma, and going all the way back through his entire career of 50 years.
I get it. And I have always appreciated the exploitation filmmakers starting in the 50s and well, and I mean, I suppose you can go even earlier, obviously, but yeah, I mean, that spirit of Corman, and I was feeling that as I interviewed Lloyd and having the conversation and stuff. So no, I can appreciate him embracing it and understanding exactly what he got into. But also, as we know, and it's something I talked about with Lloyd, the way people consume movies have certainly changed.
Right.
And I know that Troma has its own streaming subscription service that has everything, including the documentaries and all the special features you can find on the DVDs. But here is a guy that went from pre-VHS era to streaming now and stuff. And it seems like Troma has adapted to the new status quo admirably, as we see these other studios just kind of, overspending and, well, I don't think I understand this audience anymore. And it's like, well, it's pretty obvious from your material. Lloyd doesn't have that problem.
Yeah, it's important to know, and I think it's one of the things that makes Lloyd such a guru in the independent film world, and why people like your Quentin Tarantino's and others have a lot of respect for him too, is his films are a lot of fun. They're enjoyable to watch. For a lot of us, they're very nostalgic. But he also was and is something of a visionary and of a bellwether. One of the other great revelations that I had going through all these old interviews with Lloyd, going all the way back to the late 70s, early 80s, is the man was always right. He really was this, seemingly crazy lunatic person. And again, something he would also probably appreciate being categorized as. But years later, he kept being proven correct. And yes, Troma does have its own streaming service now, Troma Now, which I recommend to everybody. It's $5 a month. It's thousands of films, including not just Troma films, but films that they've distributed, including Brian De Palma's first film, Robert De Niro's first film, Kevin Costner's first films, all these great foreign films, silent films. And yes, as John, as you just said, you get all the behind-the-scenes stuff. You get interviews with different people. It's a lot like the Criterion Channel. In fact, I joke, but it's true. I mostly watch Criterion Channel and Troma, so I'm going back and forth usually between Jean-Luc Godard and Lloyd Kaufman, although there's a lot of comparisons to be made there. But Lloyd and Troma were always at the forefront of everything. They're not 100% sure, and I can find this for certain, but Roger Ebert himself did say that Troma was the first film studio, any film studio, to have a website, for example. They were, I believe, the first film studio to start distributing films through Xbox when that started being a thing. They definitely were one of the first studios or film people at all to start taking advantage of things like YouTube and some of the other social media and video websites and the like. They absolutely were some of the first to take advantage of the VHS market. In fact, one of the things that comes up also in the book, and that a lot of people know about Lloyd and Troma, especially during the 80s, is there was a time when the film studios didn't want to work with video stores because they were worried that would devalue the price of the stock.
Well, and also the movie, and keep people from seeing movies in the theater.
Right.
And stuff too.
So the big studios did not work with video stores, but video stores popped up nonetheless. So all of a sudden, much like YouTube, much like streaming services, much like all these other avenues that Lloyd and Troma is always right up front to work with, they said, we'll work with you, video stores. And that's why there was such a big renaissance and such a big burst of Troma films in the 80s, because when you went to video stores, that was a lot of what you saw was not only Troma films and films made by Lloyd, but again, a lot of the films that they were distributing, very much kind of like a Miramax type of situation, except he wasn't a big fat sexual harassment person. So the point being that they were always at the forefront. And, the funny thing is, and the sad thing is that they are laughed at for getting involved with these different technological advances or things like video stores or whatever it might be. And then they become very successful at it. And then when they and some of their colleagues and similar kinds of companies and whatnot have found a certain degree of success, with video stores or VHS or the internet or YouTube or streaming. Of course, what ends up happening, the big studios come around or the big companies come around and they put them all out of business. And we saw that happen with the whole video store chronology. And you could see that in my book with the interviews with Lloyd, where he's talking about, hey, there's this new thing going on with VHS. Hey, there's this new thing going on with video stores. Hey, we're now all over the video stores. Hey, the studios are starting to pay attention to the video stores. Isn't that kind of cool? Uh-oh, the studios are starting to take over the video stores now. Uh-oh, there's this thing called Blockbusters that's starting to really take over the video stores now and monopolizing it and telling people what they can have or not have. And they're not letting movies like the Troma people in there anymore. They're having us cut the movies so that we can be in Blockbuster. And uh-oh, now Blockbuster has run the entire video store idea out of business completely. And like, you see that pattern through these interviews with Lloyd, because he's always talking about those things. And as anybody who knows Lloyd personally or just reads or listens to his interviews or watches interviews, he is a super truth teller. I mean, he does not care. He really, really does not give a fuck. I mean, and he's been like that since he was younger. I mean, one of the questions I asked him in our interview or talked with him about was how surprised I was that he's not just some bitter, jaded old man now that he's in his 80s. He's always been like this. I'm reading interviews with him back when he's in his mid-20s, and he's talking exactly like he's talking now. I mean, he came out of the gate pissed off at the establishment, at the powers that be, at government. I mean, he really is a true blue, I hate to say it like this, but it's true. It's cliche, but he really is a true blue punk icon. I mean, that's really what he ultimately is. And he went to Yale with Oliver Stone, no less. They were actually classmates with George W. Bush even. And he came up in a very high class society. He's talked about that. He was very well educated. He got to see the world. He read a lot. He watched a lot of movies. He went to a lot of musicals and things like that when he lived in New York and when he was growing up. So he has a very sophisticated sensibility about things. And he was reading, Mill's The Power Elite, and his grandmother was very into, being against the government, very anti-authoritarian herself, and raised him that way. So as much as Lloyd likes to have fun in his interviews and in his movies, and, there's anybody knows Troma. It's blood, guts, shit, piss, tits, ass, monsters, whatever. But they're also all very much talking about very serious issues. And once again, Troma's usually at the forefront of that too. I mean, we can have as much fun as we want with Toxic Avenger, but people tend to forget that was really one of the first mainstream, if you want to call it that, or pop culture, if you want to call it that, pieces of iconography that dealt with environmentalism.
Absolutely.
Toxic waste was still a new phrase. It was still a new idea. People didn't really know what it was yet. People really weren't talking about pollution and toxicity and the need for conservation, environmentalism yet. That was still a very, very new idea and very new thing. And here's Lloyd making this goofy monster movie about it that, we can poke fun at and has its faults and everything else, as he would clearly admit. But I mean, it had a real message behind it, as do pretty much every one of his other movies. They're always dealing with topics that a lot of people aren't talking about yet. Sexuality, AIDS, war. His last few movies, he's really going after, the what he sees as the real criminals behind the opioid crisis and big pharma and whatnot. Yeah, you still have the vomiting and the sex and drugs and rock and roll and the shitting and the pissing and everything else. But meanwhile, they are talking about important issues, many of which people don't talk about on a larger level until 10 years later. So that's, I think, the magic of Lloyd and the magic of Troma, and why they have resonated and why they're able to continue bringing in new young generations of filmmakers and people who are willing to go out and spend 2 months, 3 months for almost no pay and sleeping on the floor and writhing in the mud and gook that they're making for the movies and such, just to make these movies because they want to be involved in it. And I think that that's really important, and Lloyd does too.
I know our mutual buddy Tim Seeley has written a screenplay, at least one, for a Troma film. And I love that. And I agree with you that I think the whole punk movement, as it's evolved and everything, always embraced Lloyd. As
No, Tim Seeley's just one person, and Tim's another person. Sure. I actually met Tim and became friendly with him, and he's helped me a lot with my career. He helped me to connect with Aftershock, for example, to get my comic book series You Are Obsolete going a few years ago. This was before they went bankrupt and screwed everybody over. But the point being that, Tim's been great, and I've met all these other people through the Troma world. It's a collective. It's a network. It's the kind of thing, I don't want to necessarily call it a cult, although a lot of people in it would probably call it that. But you can always find Troma people wherever you go. And I really have been able, again, being Jewish, it's like going to Chabad or something like that. Like, I have been able to be in places where I might not have known a lot of people, and I can find Troma people and stay with them, get a meal, hang out with them, work with them on a project. And, at first, when that first started happening, when I was a lot younger and kind of needed those kinds of, assistance when I'd be traveling around and whatnot,
Sure.
I would ask people, especially some of the older guys, why are you helping? Why are you being so nice? It's like, well, we're all in this together. And it's kind of the misfit mentality thing and the punk rock thing and the DIY thing and whatnot. These days, I'm just used to it now. And, you can find Troma people pretty much wherever you go, and they will be very generous. They will be very welcoming. They'll have a great movie collection. The place might smell. The place might be a little filthy. But, it's a place to stay for the night or a free meal or something like that, or they're working on some cool project. And I really have this great network of people that I've met through the Troma world. And Tim Seeley is one of them. In fact, what's funny is I met Tim through the Troma world, and Tim and I just became really good friends. And we were talking a lot and discussing about maybe collaborating on some things and whatnot. I didn't realize until after You Are Obsolete came out. I mean, I knew he did some stuff in the comic book world, and he helped me to get in touch with the Aftershock people. But it wasn't until I started touring with You Are Obsolete where everywhere I went, people were talking about Tim Seeley. And I was like, I think I even hit him up like, Tim, are you famous? Like, did I not realize that, like, you're kind of a big deal? And he's kind of, he's a humble guy. And, I guess, hack slash, etc. But, Tim was just this really down-to-earth guy who I kind of knew as my Troma friend. And there were certain other people, it was the same kind of thing where, they're just very, they're just people who want to make movies, want to make comic books, want to make music, want to make art, and they don't really put on a lot of airs. And Tim's just one of them.
Absolutely. In nerd circles, you can almost equate, especially prior to all the big success of the Marvel films, you can equate Marvel Zombies with Troma people as well. And I think there's the same kind of following. Are you aware, were there ever any encounters between Stan Lee and Lloyd Kaufman?
It's funny. As soon as you said Marvel, absolutely. Very explicitly. Lloyd and Stan came up together. They were very close friends right up to the end. Stan actually does intros and outros to a couple of the Troma films. He's in a few of the Troma films. He's done introductions and outros to some of the films, like Citizen Toxie, for example, Toxic Avenger 4. Stan does the opening introduction to it. P.S. The first one is a masterpiece just because it's so important and it created it all. But the fourth one is the one I've probably watched the most just because it's so much fun and there's so much going on. In my opinion, it's extremely well made for what it is. But yeah, Stan and Lloyd were very close. They wrote together. They actually wrote a few screenplays together. Nothing was ever produced. They got very close to getting one made by one of the French New Wave people, actually, at one point. No, they were always, it was kind of like a little less contentious, but from what I understand, it was a little bit like Ray Kroc and Walt Disney, where they were kind of always crossing paths and kind of motivating each other and sometimes, helping each other out and kind of teaching each other little tricks and such. But Lloyd and Stan were very, very close. And in fact, one of the other things that we're really proud to have in the book, Lloyd Kaufman Interviews, it's coming out in February, is through my other project, as you know, John, that I've done recently, the Comic-Con Oral History. I became friendly with somebody over there who, good timing, I became friendly with somebody over there who actually had a DVD of Lloyd's roast that they had for him at the 2009 Comic-Con, the 2009 San Diego Comic-Con. And there were all these different people there at the roast, and I believe it was hosted by or the Toastmaster or Roastmaster, but one of the primary people was Stan Lee, and he's there. And we actually were able to get permission to transcribe that. We just transcribed Lloyd's retort. We didn't do the whole entire roast, but that's also going to appear in the book. And
that's great.
Even Lloyd hadn't heard or seen it since it happened. So that's something that's really special that'll be in the book, is Lloyd's retort to his 2009 Comic-Con race. That involved Stan Lee. But yeah, no, they were very tight. They were very close right up until the end. I'm quite certain Lloyd even went to his funeral. I think he's still friendly with some of the family and estate and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of connection between Marvel and Troma and Lloyd and Stan Lee. Absolutely.
That's great. I'll remind people and put up the cover again for the video audience. See you in San Diego, or see you at San Diego is the title. Jeff's it's Mathew Klickstein collecting all these amazing interviews that include, if you're looking at the cover right now, Stan Sakai, Jeff Smith, RZA, lots of pop culture people. It really is an extensive history of the San Diego Comic-Con that started when a few kid hippies who were comic book fans decided to all get together and talk about comics at the El Capitan was the first hotel, or
they did a few smaller ones first, but ultimately when it really started taking off was at the El Capitan. Yeah, there were smaller ones. Yeah, there were a few other places, but
and grew from there.
Yeah.
But you'll be surprised reading the book, the filmmakers, the other people that ended up coming to Comic-Con and presenting panels or whatever. But really shows.
Lloyd's actually one of the people that we interviewed for the book. And in fact, one of his team members even got us some really great photos of Lloyd and Troma over the years at Comic-Con, including special guests like, of course, James Gunn and Ivan Reitman and a few other people like that. So, Lloyd again was very much integral to the development of Comic-Con, and talks a little bit about that as, once more, one of the first film studios to go to Comic-Con back in the day when some of the other film studios weren't as sure if they should spend time or energy to go. And so once again, and Lloyd talks about the same thing, slowly over the years as some of the bigger studios came and Marvel became bigger and all these other things like that, he slowly and surely got kind of pushed to the sideline. Whereas beforehand, Troma and Lloyd were such a big part of Comic-Con back in the 80s and early 90s a little bit, then once everyone else kind of figured out what the secret sauce was and started coming out, Lloyd got pushed aside. But he's still very much enjoys his Comic-Con experiences, always has a lot of good things to say about them. He's not too bitter about that. And trust me, I know, because he can be very angry and bitter, especially about certain comic conventions that he really hates now because of how poorly they've treated him. But, and just real quick, John, it goes back, the second thing I was going to say about your earlier question, follow up to that is, what does Lloyd think about, being ignored or maligned or kind of that kind of thing. And now he, is being canonized with this book and, some of these other things that have come out over the last years. The irony of it is that he still is very much underrated. There's still a lot of people who don't know who Lloyd Kaufman is. There's still a lot of people who don't know what Troma is, even though they just did the big reboot with Macon Blair writing and directing the new Toxic Avenger with Peter Dinklage as the Toxic Avenger and Kevin Bacon's in it and Elijah Wood. That's a whole other thing that I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware of, that it still hasn't been released, and we'll see what happens with that. But the fact that a company like Legendary came in and put some tens of millions of dollars into making this thing happen says a lot. So, that is out there, in the ether, but still, Lloyd himself, and we watched this happen this year in 2024, it was the 50th anniversary of Troma. It was the 40th anniversary of the Toxic Avenger. And there was almost no coverage of it in mainstream press or mainstream media. When he releases new movies, they rarely get even reviewed anymore. And he's had a few come out, and they're pretty dang good. I mean, Shakespeare Shitstorm, if you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. It's a great film. It's really good. I'm pretty sure Tim was involved with that. Tim Seeley was involved with that one too. But it's very well done, and it's really like, some steps ahead of some of the earlier Troma films. It still has that kind of DIY, again, punk ethos and whatnot. It's not like all of a sudden it's going to get all cleaned up or something like that. And it's very ribald and very vulgar and kind of disgusting and whatever else, and as offensive and lurid and everything as any other Troma movie. But it's just craftsmanship wise, it's made a lot better, and it's a better film than some of his earlier ones in a lot of ways. But it got very little coverage, very little press, didn't really get reviewed, and that's a shame. And we talked about this a little bit in my interview with him for the book too. Not to completely put him on the same echelon as some of these other filmmakers, but you saw the same thing with someone like Stanley Kubrick, who everyone respected and everyone knew who he was and everyone talked about him, but he couldn't get money in the end for the movies he wanted to do, like Napoleon, very famously. Or John Cassavetes is another really good example, where you had people like Scorsese and all these other filmmakers who looked up to him and wanted to make movies like him. And yet by the end of his life, again, Cassavetes wasn't even being reviewed anymore. He actually, a lot of people don't know this, he bought his own movie theater just so that he could show some of the movies that he was making toward the end, because he could barely even get distribution anymore. He wasn't even really getting reviewed anymore. Pauline Kael went from being a bête noire and kind of a rival and somebody he fought with to like, she just basically ignored him by the end. It's kind of sad. And of course, and we talk about this with Lloyd, and Lloyd's aware of it, you know what's going to happen. The day that he's gone, all of a sudden, you're going to have all these filmmakers and all these people come out of the woodwork and talk about Lloyd Kaufman and Troma and all this stuff. And we're
how important.
That's great, but where are you guys now? Like Cassavetes, like Kubrick, like some of these other filmmakers or musicians or writers, it's like we got to support them now. It would be so great if some of the people who look up to Lloyd or have been influenced by Lloyd or who were, mentored by Lloyd, did more to support him. It's great what James Gunn does. It's great what some of these other people do. They are out there doing that. But at the end of the day, it could be more. And it's a shame and it's sad that, a lot of mainstream press and there are a lot of filmmakers and actors and people who are involved with Troma who kind of have stepped away. And, Lloyd and Troma could really use it at this point, before he's gone forever, So that it's a complex situation. In a lot of ways, he is as ignored and maligned and mocked now as he was even back then. And in some ways back then, like especially in the 80s and early 90s, they were kind of true to their motto of films of the future. And, there were a lot of people who were really into them and talking about them and, that went with the whole punk rock thing. And they were having retrospectives at MoMA and retrospectives at all these different art museums and all these festivals and such. And, sadly, a lot of that's gone away. And I don't know how much the next generation's even aware of what Troma is or who Lloyd is, just because there's not enough spotlight on him. And that was why I was so driven to do this book. I love Lloyd as a person. I love Lloyd as a filmmaker. I love Lloyd as a disruptor. I love Lloyd as a mentor to me and to so many people. And, like a lot of the work I do, even the Comic-Con oral history book that you just showed and some of the other projects that I've done, so much of what I do is about shedding spotlight on people who, A, I feel have done so much for our culture and have not gotten the due that they deserve, and B, are not going to be around much longer. Lloyd takes pretty good care of himself and is relatively healthy, so I could see him going for another 10, maybe even 20 years. Norman Lear, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner,
Dick Van Dyke, who just had a birthday.
Yeah, there are people who make it to 100. Lloyd might be one of those people. I mean, he's in his early 80s. I mean, he still might have a while to go.
Good,
but he might not. And
I get it.
We need to support and appreciate him. Even while I was working on the Comic-Con oral history, as you know, John, some of the people that I was talking with and interviewing and chronicling, some of them I became pretty close with, they're no longer with us. Greg Bear is a really great example, one of the early creators of Comic-Con, who's a big science fiction writer also, and a few others. Trina Robbins, she's no longer with us. Wow, there's a great example of what an important and amazing person. And there's not a lot of people who know who she is. There's not a lot of people who realize how important she was. Where's her documentary? Well, where's her museum? Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. And
no, you're right.
I got pretty close towards the end. I miss her. I mean, it's sad that she's gone, and that more people don't know who she is. So I want to do everything I can to help bring some real light and spotlight to Lloyd, to Troma, to the films they made. And I think, film in general would be better if more people appreciated what they did, how they did it, why they did it. And I want to be a part of that.
Well, and, right now we really are seeing a shift in filmmaking, and because of the technical advancements that have been happening in the internet age, it is easier and easier for an individual to make his own film. And that is another reason why they should be aware of Lloyd and what Troma.
Yeah, he was such a big part of that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Is there, and again, I want Lloyd to continue for decades if possible, but because I know Corman's wife became very important in the Corman equation of filmmaking, and I don't know what her plans are since Roger passed a year or 2 years ago, whatever it is. But is there a structure under Lloyd that if, the worst happens, that Troma would continue?
Someone asked that very same question on an interview that we did together a couple of weeks ago. And I kind of knew this. Lloyd basically just confessed it. Not really. He has a lifelong creative and business partner, Michael Hertz, who created Troma with him, is still very much involved in Troma. Lloyd's kind of the face of Troma. Michael's kind of the behind the scenes guy. They met in film school. Lloyd was actually kind of knew who Michael was through a younger brother who was friendly with Michael also, and I think went to summer camp with them or something. So they've literally known each other their entire lives. Very, very close guys, and they made Troma and continue to make Troma together even now. But from what Lloyd said, Michael's kids are not interested in Troma, or I think making in general. Lloyd has 3 daughters. All of whom have been involved in or who've even made their own films and make behind the scenes projects and have been in Troma films, especially when they were younger. But he says he doesn't really think that any of them would want to really take the torch on Troma. I don't want to speak out of turn, and maybe they do, and he just was joking or something, or maybe he's not sure or something like that. But it sounds like, as much as some of them are very involved in film, they might just not want to do the Troma thing.
Sure.
Lloyd's wife, Patty, who's great, she actually was a longtime New York Film Commissioner. Lloyd and Troma were not allowed to, be connected to her for projects like that. And I believe both of them when they've said that she recused herself from being involved in any Troma productions. But, she obviously has her film background too in that regard. And really, a lot of people know her through helping to really get the New York independent film scene going. Through kind of logistics and practicality stuff, because she was the film commissioner for so long, which was really important also. But the point being, from Lloyd's own answer when we were asked that question just a few weeks ago, it sounds like no.
Oh, wow.
He has some proteges. Mercedes the Muse, for example, has made some really great movies in the last few years. She's making one right now. She made a fantastic film called Divide and Conquer, which is I'm getting chills thinking about it. It's so pure Troma. It's not the kind of movie you want to go on a first date with. It's not the kind of movie you want to take anybody. If anybody is going to ask for trigger warnings, then this is not the movie for them. But it is so pure Troma, mixed with a little bit of Pasolini, I would say, even like early John Waters. Like it really goes deep. But it's also, again, it's got good messaging in it. The character development is great. It's still a good, fun movie that you can't take your eyes off of. It's almost like a car accident the entire time. Mercedes has made a few other films. Is finishing one right now. I can't remember the name of it. But, Lloyd has talked about her as his protege. And there are a few other people that, kind of new versions of James Gunn or some of the filmmakers. And so, who knows, maybe one of them might come and be able to, help out, or, look what goes on with even somebody like James. I mean, maybe when Lloyd's gone, James will come through and maybe buy Troma or buy the library just to help keep it going or something like that. I mean, I wouldn't be that surprised if something like that happened. But for the time being, it sounds like there is no heir apparent for Lloyd Kaufman at this time, which, I think is a little scary and a little bit of a shame. I know that Lloyd is definitely so much of what keeps Troma going. Just his face, the fact that he still goes everywhere. He goes to all the festivals. He travels around the world. He does all these things. I mean, he really is that guy who does that, as people know. I mean, many people who know about Troma and Lloyd know about him because they've seen him in person. And he'll go to like even the smallest little like 20-person thing, as long as there's, food, lodging, and hopefully other expenses taken care of, he'll go. He's all about that. He loves his fans. He loves continuing to be kind of this Johnny Appleseed of Troma and independent film, truly independent film. And it's really important for him. And he keeps doing that. If he were to stop, if he, became sick, or if he was no longer with us, I wonder how much Troma would keep going. Or it would be maybe the name would keep going, but it wouldn't really be the same thing. We've seen this with, whether it's the New York Times or Saturday Night Live or Rolling Stone or some of these other cultural institutions where it's like, they've got the same name, but it's not, it's the same building, but it's not the same restaurant. They've got a different menu, they've got a different staff. And
totally.
I would hate to see that happen to Troma, but I would also hate to see Troma just completely disappear. We'll see what happens. But as I said, look, I talk to Lloyd all the time. He seems to have a lot of energy. I really feel, maybe I wouldn't say it. It wouldn't really be anybody's business. But I will say right now, he certainly hasn't told me he has any kind of real health issues or anything like that. He takes pretty good care of himself. He looks pretty fit. He's active. He's got a lot of energy. And I think he's one of those people where he's got a lot of young people around him that give him a lot of that energy. And so I could see him keep going for another 25 years, as some people have, like Norman Lear or
Sure.
Mel Brooks is still around,
Right.
So
No, and both of them productive in their 90s, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even Carl Reiner cranking out as many books as he did. And really, God, however many weeks ago it was, Dick Van Dyke just had his 99th birthday.
Yeah.
And that fantastic video that he made with Coldplay was just great, and a nice tribute, and also just like, hey, look, there he is, and he's doing great at 99, which is fantastic.
I was actually just talking to some people about it. It had its problems, but I really enjoyed Juror Number 2, made by 94-year-old Clint Eastwood. And although some of his other recent movies I haven't particularly cared for. I mean, he gets them done, he gets them made, and some of them I have. I like The Mule, I like Gran Torino. Even Sully was not that long ago,
and even Trouble with the Curve is a decent baseball movie, not a great baseball movie.
He's still able to do it. He's still able to get it done. And Juror Number 2 is very well directed, great cast, great direction for the acting. It drags a little bit in the beginning. It's not 12 Angry Men. It's not The Verdict. But after you get about halfway through a little bit more, it really starts to pick up. And I actually started very much enjoying it. And overall, though, I would recommend it to people just to give it a shot. And, again, 94 years old. So, it can be done. It can be
done.
Sure. Clint's even still in some of his movies, for goodness sake.
Yes.
So, he was great in The Mule. And that's a lot of what The Mule was about being kind of this broken down old guy who's still, finding some use for himself and that kind of thing. So, look, I always like to tell people, he wasn't in his 90s, but George Miller was 70 when he made Mad Max Fury Road. And I mean, not only was that such a great film and so much fun and completely replenished the whole series and that kind of thing, but boy, that blew some of these, 20, 30 something year old kids out of the water. It was like, hold on, guys, let me show you how the men do it. Let me show you how the old guys do it over here. And he went and did it, and like, wow, Mad Max Fury Road, and 70 years old. I mean, and he hadn't made movies in a while. And his early movies before that were like Happy Feet or whatever. Probably, he had to make some money somewhere.
Sure. I have to, it hasn't started yet, but Katrina Longworth's excellent. You must remember this podcast. She's going to focus on directors in their final years and people like Hitchcock and now I'm blanking. George, Philadelphia Story, and great director George Cukor and a lot of these people, Preminger as well, that, the struggles they had with their final films. John Ford as well is, I think, going to be involved with that. So I'm really looking forward to it. But I am curious to get it back to Lloyd and this excellent book. And here, I'll put it up again, everybody, because you should pre-order this fantastic book that Matthew has edited and also does some interviews in the book as well. The European and really the rest of the world's point of view of Lloyd. Do they regard him as a unique American filmmaker? I mean, what position-wise, and will we glean from these interviews that he's done what the rest of the world's perception is of Lloyd?
Yeah, it's a good question, John. Thank you. I actually did have to have a few of my interviews translated. There's, I think, a Swedish one. I think there's a French one. As you can imagine, and he's compared himself to Jerry Lewis for this very reason. The Europeans have always been very supportive of Troma, and there's just something that translates over there. And I think, again, that they connect with his trash cinema mentality, his anti-authoritarianism. I wouldn't necessarily even call Lloyd or Troma anti-American per se, but definitely very critical of certain aspects of venal and corrupt American systems that a lot of European countries, especially, French filmmakers in the French film scene, or other, European film scenes agree, are problematic. And we see this all the time, even with, the French New Wavers and that kind of thing. They might have seen Americanism as slightly decadent and consumeristic. And, you had, especially, there was a long period where people like Jean-Luc Godard were really fiercely, were pretty anti-American and anti, Coca-Cola and the pop music and this and that. but at the same time embrace it too, and embrace the genre filmmaking, and embrace, you know, the noir films, and embrace the jazz, and embrace comic books, and embrace,
Sure.
you know, a lot of the American artistic idiom, while also critiquing kind of the systems of power around all of that. And Lloyd certainly does that very, very well in his interviews, in his lifestyle, and in his films. You know, look, when Toxic Avenger's not holding his mop, he's holding an American flag for the most part. It might be dirty, it might be filthy, you know, or even Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD. I mean, there's some humor to this character being a member of the, you know, New York Police Department, but he is a member of the New York Police Department. I mean, there is a law and order aspect to his character that can't be denied, and is very iconic for the Troma world. So, you know, Lloyd has those kinds of dichotomies in his life, in his interviews, and in his work. And I think the Europeans really appreciate that, and maybe even more so. And he definitely has gotten a lot of support from international film festivals, and especially the French. And I'm pretty sure, you know, like him or lump him, kind of like Woody Allen, you know, who's gotten a lot of his money off for obvious reasons over the last few years from European financiers. I'm pretty sure that's where a lot of Lloyd's funding has come from also.
Oh, great.
You know, is for that very same reason. Lloyd has also put in a lot of his own money. He and his
Sure.
wife Pat, because they kind of have to at this point. But, you know, again, Cassavetes style. But, you know, Lloyd has always been very appreciated in Europe, maybe more so. I actually, and then other places too, one of the other interviews in the book is there was a fellow in, I think it was Australia. This took a really long time to track him down to get permission to use the interview. I found it through this library resource, but he did an interview with Lloyd for his college thesis some years ago. And I believe it was a college in Australia, and we were able to finally track him down to get permission to use it in the book. But, you know, those are the kinds of things that are in the book, and those are the kinds of people who are interviewing Lloyd, an Australian graduate student who wants to write about Troma for his thesis. So, and I don't even think he was studying film. I think it was something separate. I think it was, you know, something like some kind of connection between media and politics or something like that. But yeah, I mean, so Lloyd is appreciated very much in other countries for sure.
That's great, man. No, I'm excited for this. It's coming out. I expect at least a PDF from you when you're ready.
Well, my publisher should have sent one already. I thought they already had.
I didn't get it yet, but that's
okay.
all right.
That's okay. I'll remind them. I know they sent them to some other people. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you get the Fantagraphics book at least?
I ordered it myself. I bought it actually.
All right.
And I was happy to do it. No, Matthew, I was happy to do it because it's a great book. And hey, man, no, you got me. Listen, we did interviews for it. I had wonderful conversations with Scott Shaw that I absolutely adore and got to know him better.
No, I'm actually a little surprised. I mean, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here, but I did tell them to get you at least a PDF, or if not,
okay, man.
I know cool. That the hard copies haven't come out yet. I haven't even gotten any yet.
Yeah, it's all good. No.
Yeah.
Hey, man, I've got, as I'm sure,
you're always so helpful, and you know, I know you really care, and you're the kind of people, you're the kind of person who I want to have this book, so that
thank you.
Get and read it and
well,
talk with people about. Yeah.
Truly, I'm losing shelf space. So no, I mean, as I'm sure many of us watching and listening can attest to. So I'm very happy to get it digitally. It's okay, and I just want to read it. So no, that's great. And moving on a couple other things that you got going on. Again, everybody, See You at San Diego is out there from Fantagraphics and available through all booksellers as well. And again, it's an excellent oral history. What's happening? Is the potential documentary still happening?
I certainly hope so. You know, I mean, I know I'm not bringing any news from the muddled world of both independent and mainstream Hollywood and filmmaking. It's tough. It's really tough out there. And you know, the streamers are struggling.
Yes, everybody's struggling. All media outlets. Go ahead.
There's still a lot of catch up happening from COVID. There's still a lot of catch up happening from all the strikes that happened.
Sure.
And you know, the streamers themselves have caused a lot of problems that are now catching up with them.
They overspent and now are stuck with things that they made that aren't attracting the audience they were hoping for. Absolutely. And really, Matthew, there are tons of documentarians and established producers of television and film that I am in contact with that tell me about the struggle. And they're like, no, man, nobody is buying anything. And if they are buying it, it's cheap. Hold on, Matthew, let me finish. Yeah. They're cheap. And also, if it doesn't have a big star or an obvious subject, like I just saw a great Elvis documentary, I just saw a great Beatles documentary, those are no-brainers. But it is even something like a Christopher Lee look back. I heard a fantastic podcast of them talking about Christopher Lee's whole life. And it's like, I want to see this. And it's like, I'm sure there's an audience, but it's convincing the media companies and the people that own the platforms that, no, this is worth putting on there. So, yeah, please tell me about your experience.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry to have interrupted you because you're right about all that, John. And, I don't want to get into it too deep. I've been developing a possible project about what we're talking about right now, just because I've been very affected by this. A lot of my friends have been very affected by this. People who have had movies come out in the theaters, people who have movies on Netflix right now, people who, are doing some pretty great big things and have achieved a certain degree of so-called success. They're still really struggling. And we're talking struggling right down to like paying for their food for their kids or paying for rent and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
There really is a problem right now where even people who are able to get on Netflix or able to get their movies in theaters or able to go to Sundance or all these other things are struggling financially, are struggling to get their other projects going, are dealing with all this contractual nonsense. I'm friends with I've become friends with Macon Blair. We were just talking about the reboot of Toxic Avenger. There's not really too much else to say there, and I wouldn't in any way, even if I knew a little bit more. But the reality is, for the time being, that movie's been shelved, and a lot of money was put into it. A lot of time was put into it. It's a movie that they've been talking about wanting to do for decades. I mean, going back through Lloyd's old interviews, I mean, they were talking about a big budget reboot of Toxic Avenger at least as early as the late 90s. I mean, I believe it. Going for forever. At one point, Akiva Goldsman was going to be involved in it, for goodness sakes. So, for a movie like that to be shelved for the time being, or obviously what happened with Batgirl, what happened with the Wile E. Coyote movie, and definitely it's affecting documentary filmmakers. I mean, you yourself said not only to get films like what we're trying to do with the Comic-Con documentary really funded and going, but also even when people are done, they still might not have the project going. What's been going on with this Led Zeppelin documentary? What's been going on with a 6-part or whatever Prince documentary? Alex Braverman's recent Andy Kaufman movie, which I heard was fantastic and was killing it on the film, festival circuit. And I think even Morgan Neville got involved at one point. I think they only just recently made a deal, and where the hell is it? We still can't see it. So, I mean, it's like that's really scary and very difficult. And I know, I've made some documentaries myself. I've been involved in some documentaries. It's always been very difficult. But I know some people who, are real, mainstays in the field, and they don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah.
And, it's very, very scary. And so, where this all comes back to is I'm not exactly sure what's going on with the Comic-Con documentary. We made a deal with Oscar Boyson, who's the producer of all the Safdie brothers movies like Uncut Gems. He produced some of Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach's early films. Great guy. He actually just wrote and directed his first feature himself, and he's going to be doing some festivals and stuff with that. He came on board about a little over a year ago to get involved, and then he brought on a guy named David Permute, who has executive produced movies since the early 90s, including some really fun kind of rom-com stuff like Captain Ron and Trapped in Paradise. But he also executive produced Face Off. He more recently executive produced and produced movies like Rustin with the Obamas. He just did a movie called Twinless, which just got into Sundance. It's going to be playing Sundance this next year. So, he's kind of our big heavy hitter. But, truth be told, even he's having his tough times. I mean, it's not easy for him either. We're working with the director right now. I can't really say whom. A lot of people who are listening probably know at least some of his work. He's a great guy. He's shot some stuff with us. He's traveled a little bit with us. We're kind of piecemealing some things, but the reality is it's tough. And I really don't know exactly where we're at with it. I think something will happen at some point. We had a different version working with a different team earlier. Unfortunately, they had kind of I think a wrong vision of how to tell the story that ended up not working out. But I will tell you, John, just to wrap this part up, it's like, we've been pitching to the streaming services and we've been talking to all these people, and the same thing keeps happening. We'll get people who are really interested. Things look really good. And a week later, they're laid off. It's like,
yes.
It's like, I hear that story over and over and over again. That's the hardest part is you get these meetings set up and then they go well, and then you never hear from them again because they got fired or laid off. Or you get a meeting set up and then the meeting doesn't happen and you find out they got laid off or they got fired or they got transferred to a different department, or they're having to run some kind of emergency on some other project they're working on, or you're working with these people who are doing 50 projects at once and they can't give you the time of day. So what's really sad about it, and I'm glad you asked about it, and I wish I could talk about this on a larger level. It's why I might be working on a whole other project specifically about what we're talking about right now, because I think it's very important that the consumers know what's going on and that the audience know what's going on. I think a lot of people are finding out what's going on because these stories keep coming out. It's hard to ignore it. It's hard to hide it now. But I want to get into some specifics as to why and how it's happening and how it can be changed. Really a lot of what it comes down to is that, it's collapsed and it's really fallen apart. And that will affect, not just what we're doing, but what comes out. And that will affect, the kinds of movies. People are saying, like, why are movies so bad now? Why are they all reboots and sequels and all these other things? And it's like, this is the reason why. Because decisions are being made not based on what's good or bad, but based on what can I do to keep my job, and it's all about marketing. And as you said, unless you have a really big celebrity or influencer and such, and even that might fail horribly. And we've seen that over and over and over again. They'll take these big influencers on YouTube or these big influencers on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, try to make a movie with them, and they fail horribly. And yet they keep trying to do it over and over and over again. And it's like, just because these people have 10 million followers doesn't necessarily mean those 10 million people are going to go spend $15 in a movie theater or $5 or $10 renting it on a streaming service.
Or they're being changed to fit a standard television or film format, and that's and they lose the authenticity that they had on YouTube or whatever social platforms they're on. No, I mean, listen, we don't need to get into politics, but clearly there has been a change from awareness of what's happening in mainstream media versus going to these alternatives like the internet. Hi, everybody, and having more of a direct influence on those consumers that are like, no, I go here either for information or news or whatever, not the big networks, not the big streamers. And we're seeing it happen on a grand scale as far as I think this current presidential environment. The election that we just finished and what's about to take place in January in the new Trump administration, all of that stuff. But regardless, I want to get back because I want to talk about this, and that is a new graphic novel that you've done.
Trump.
There you go. Daisy Goes to the Moon, a fun book that you've adapted with Rick Gary, a fantastic illustrator. Yeah. Tell us about Daisy Goes to the Moon.
Yeah, Daisy Goes to the Moon is an interesting project, and it just so happened that I got both these projects going around the same time a couple of years ago, and for various reasons, they're coming out back to back. I normally don't have that happen, but it's just how it worked out. So anytime I'm talking about one book, I try to talk about the other, because as anybody knows, and as we just talked a lot about, I'm really proud of the publishers I'm working with. University Press of Mississippi for the Lloyd book is nothing to sneeze at. But they are an academic press, so publicity and such is going to be rough to get. And then Fantagraphics, same thing as we know. I'm very happy to be part of them, and they put out a really great product. And I was big fans of theirs even before I started working with them on the Comic-Con project. But the reality is they are still a relatively small independent company, and they just don't have the kind of resources to do the sort of publicity that some of these larger publishers and such do. And so you end up having to do a lot of it yourself, or just kind of having to figure that out. So I'm always going to be trying to talk about whatever I can whenever I can, because I love writing and I love producing, but I also need to try to make some money. And so we do have Daisy Goes to the Moon come out too. Real quick, it's actually kind of an interesting backstory. In 2008, going back all the way to 2008, I wrote this novella of Daisy Goes to the Moon. It's really wacky, experimental, kind of crazy little novella. I took a lot of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who wrote books like The Little Prince, Alice in Wonderland, a lot of Philip K. Dick, mixed it up a bit with some William Burroughs, Naked Lunch, and created something that was pretty unique based around an actual person who existed named Daisy Ashford. She was growing up in the Victorian era, and as young as 4 years old, she first started writing her own books. Her parents helped her out to write them. What was interesting about these books, and she did it all the way until her early teens, she wrote 4 or 5 different books. None of them were published. They just kind of wrote them for fun. They presented 2 different things at once. One is a very unadulterated, unfiltered view of the Victorian era, because she was a child, so she didn't understand or notice or care about or wasn't aware of kind of certain mores and social standards and such. So she just was writing as a child, but not now or not in the 80s or something like that, in the Victorian era. So it's a very pure perspective on that period. 2, she wrote, and her parents kept the bad spelling, the bad phrases, bad grammar, even logic sometimes doesn't make sense. She doesn't know how babies are born, for example. So, 2 people get married, and then 6 weeks later, they are delivered a brown package outside their door, and it's a baby, because she doesn't know how babies are born. And so to her, that's how that happens. And so I took this character, I took this person who years later, when she became an adult, she was going through some of her young writings that she had and saw that there was something there that was kind of interesting. They somehow got to the office of J.M. Barrie, who, of course, created Peter Pan, and he was completely entranced by what he saw. He saw the value of what they would later call the Victorian era through the eyes of the cradle. And it was this very kind of outsider art, if you will, or pure language. And they kept all the misspellings, and they kept all of the wrong, common sense things, like where babies come from and whatnot. And she tells these very elaborate kind of Jane Austen, like Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility type stories, but told from the point of view of a child, and by somebody who didn't know how to spell, and somebody who didn't understand how the world worked, and that's part of what makes them such interesting books. She's obviously a bit bigger in England than she ever was in America, but her books, and she became famous enough that when F. Scott Fitzgerald first started getting big, people referred to him as a quote unquote Daisy Ashford. Like, oh, you're just this young upstart who doesn't really know anything about the world, kind of like Daisy Ashford. I think at one point, even Bret Easton Ellis, who, aside from American Psycho and some of his other books that have been
Less Than Zero, another book of his.
He wrote Less Than Zero when he was 21. I think there was comparisons made by some people, I would imagine, at least in England, to Daisy Ashford. Like, basically pejorative of like, oh, you're just this kind of like, you're this gimmick, you're this fad because you're this young, kid. They even, I don't know how many people are aware of this. There's actually a Patty Duke episode where Patty's really upset because she finds out that there's this young girl as young as she, like 14 or 15 or whatever, who became really famous for writing books in France or something like that. She wanted to do it too. And the whole episode, it's a little bit about what we've just been talking about. There's actually an episode of Patty Duke where Patty becomes involved in this kind of pyramid scheme type of like fake bullshitty vanity press thing. I guess they had them even back then.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
They kind of convince her, oh, you're this great writer and you're going to be able to tell, you're the voice of your generation and blah, blah, blah. And, kind of echoes of future Lena Dunham, if you will. And I was watching go like, wow, this is like Lena Dunham.
Oh, I bet William Shallard was like at his dad best. Now, Patty, I know we all have dreams, but
and they had to kind of explain to her, what it really was and whatnot. And so that's the sort of Daisy Ashford mythos. And so I took that and I combined it with some of these other influences I was talking about, because where it all came from really was I just had this image in my head, and it's on the cover of the book. And Rick did this without my even asking. The image of Daisy straddling a rocket ship going to the moon, kind of like, 1950s, sci-fi pulp kind of story.
Well, forgive me, Matthew, but really more George Millet's
I was just
From
gonna,
the Earth to the
you
Moon.
read my mind as usual,
Well,
John.
of course, man.
I was literally about to
you know.
say that. I was literally about to say that. Yeah, obviously that's really where it comes from. The
Yeah.
George Millet's thing. And I was just about to say that. Good call.
Sorry, man. I didn't mean to.
No, please. That's what I love about this show, John. I mean, look, we've known each other long enough now. We've done podcasts and panels. We've worked together.
Sure.
Yeah, no surprises there.
No, it looks great. And really, Rick seems to be the right guy to convey that Victorian look.
No, I mean,
for this.
It's perfect. And real quick, so what happened was I did do the novella. It came out through a buddy of mine's new company that he was starting up in Portland, Oregon at the time. For those in the cheap seats, it was 2008, though, so we all know where that went. So the whole thing basically collapsed with the economic collapse. All these other things happened. We just had a lot of bad luck. An entire, printing of the books that he was keeping in his garage at one point got flooded. I mean, it really became this whole bad situation.
Sure.
But funnily enough, we wanted it to be a series. They were going to be the Daisy Ashford adventures. She was, she wasn't just going to go to the moon. She was going to go to, the center of the earth. She was going to go back in time. She was going to go into other books, kind of that sort of fun, nostalgic sci-fi kind of adventure story and type of situation. We wanted to do comic books. We wanted to do graphic novels. We wanted to do cartoons. We just really wanted to take this character and do all these things with it. But because of the economic collapse and some other things, just life, it didn't work out. Well, 15 years later, I'm working on the Comic-Con oral history, and I become friendly with Rick Geary because he was one of the people who helped us out with the book. He created the first logo of Comic-Con. He was very involved in the early days of Comic-Con. He's still, big staple there and that kind of thing. And as soon as I saw his artwork for the first time, I'd heard about him and I knew a little bit about what he did, but I hadn't really investigated his artwork. There's Rick right there. We're both at Comic Fest this last year. But it wasn't until I really started investigating his work. And one of the first things I thought was, this is what I would want Daisy Goes to the Moon to look like. And I will admit, and, a little warning to some people, I'm sure Gary Groth and the gang at Fine Art Graphics would hate for me to say this, but little warning, it is written in this very strange way. It is this very kind of idiosyncratic language, and the storytelling is very strange and meta. I think some people will see it as a bit of a trip, kind of the David Lynch, Thomas Pynchon, Naked Lunch type of a thing. That's what I was trying to do. I really wanted to kind of screw with people's heads a little bit using the Daisy Ashford character. But some people might just check out and not really get it. I have had people who really like my work who read the novella, including my own mom, who were just like, man, I can't do this one. I don't get it. I don't understand what's going on. And, even the language is a little bit cryptic. But fortunately for the graphic novel, Rick's artwork is so beautiful. I think even if people are struggling a little bit with the language or that kind of thing, it's like an opera. Even if you don't know Italian, you can still enjoy the singing. You can enjoy the spectacle. You can enjoy the production design. So too here. I mean, just flipping through the book, looking at the artwork, Rick really is a legend. You can see on the back of the book, we have a tweet from Guillermo del Toro talking about how much he loves Rick Geary. We actually just got him a copy of the book. We're hoping maybe he might be interested in helping us get the word out, or who knows, maybe something else. There's definitely some connections there with Pan's Labyrinth, etc. That's for later down the road. You never know. But the point being, that book comes out in hardcover through Fantagraphics in February. Very proud of how the project came together. And yeah, as I said, the novella was a toughie. I wasn't sure what Rick would say. We really didn't know each other that well. I thought I would send him a copy of the book and he would say, what the hell is this? Leave me alone, kid. Instead, he went, I completely get what this would be. Let's do it. We made a deal with Gary at Fantagraphics. Gary was all in. And 3 years later, here we are. So it started in 2008. I met Rick in 2021 or 2020, whenever the hell that was. I don't even remember now. We started talking about Daisy Goes to the Moon, and here we are now, 2025, and it's coming out. So it's been quite a journey to get it here. And once again, I just hope it can get out there in the way that it deserves. Rick's artwork is absolutely incredible in it. The cover design is fantastic. It's actually, you can't see from the GIF, but it's embossed. You can actually feel.
Oh, wow.
Fantagraphics, whatever trouble they might have with publicity and marketing, that kind of stuff, they put together a beautiful goddamn book every single time.
Excellent.
They do things no one else would do. They really care about that. They really create great products, and I knew that they would not let me down, and they did not. I didn't even know it was going to be hardcover. I assumed it was going to be paperback. And
sure.
It's hardcover. And again, just the binding, and it's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book.
It's good to hear, man. And again, Rick's art is very Little Nemo, Winsor McKay.
Yes,
And again, if Malaise gets by you as a comic book fan, I'm assuming you might know about
no,
the
it's
history of things like
very
Little
Winsor
Nemo and stuff.
McKay.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about. I was, Rick kind of took it and wanted to do his own thing with it, which I wanted him to do. I really wasn't that involved in the adaptation and that kind of thing. He would consult with me, and he would send me pencil sketches that I would look over and kind of give him some thoughts and whatnot. By the way, if anybody who's ever known Rick or worked with Rick or anything, his pencil sketches look better than 99% of people's finished work. I mean, we could have printed his pencil sketches and people would have said, yeah, that looks good. Sure. Yeah. So like when I was getting the pencil sketches back from him, and it was just like, whoa, like Rick, like, oh my, it's like practically you did this on a napkin maybe or something, like, oh my God, like
that's great.
Wow. Like it just blew and I just kept going, and Gary too. I mean, we were all on kind of email threads together, just going like, this is going to look amazing. And then it did. And
excellent.
So I'm very excited by it. We kind of have a little tease at the end of, the next book, kind of talking about some of these things I was just talking about where, we want Daisy to go to other places and things like that. So we'll, you never know. We'll see what happens. And by the way, Rick proves our point again. How old is Rick? 77. Rick is 77 years old. And he is still very much with it. He's still making art. He just did a 96-page graphic novel entirely on his own. And he was really easy to work with. We had a lot of fun together at Comic Fest. Nearly 80 and still doing it and working.
That's excellent.
Books. I think he just had another book that just came out recently. I mean, the guy is not slowing down at all. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
No, man, honestly, I like the people you collaborate with. By the way, everybody, here's a great picture of Lloyd and Matt. And and a familiar hero sitting there with him, exactly, Toxie himself. Yep. So that's great, honestly, Matthew. Well, February is going to be a big month for Matthew, and you can pre-order. Can you pre-order Daisy as well as?
You can pre-order Daisy Goes to the Moon, and you can pre-order Lloyd Kaufman interviews. Both. I always tell people the same thing. We all hate Amazon. We all hate Jeff Bezos, but they are big players in the game. So what I always tell people is, get your book from your local bookstore. Help out your local bookstore, please. Help out your local comic book store. What's nice about the Lloyd Kaufman book is even though it's not a comic book or graphic novel, because comic book people love Lloyd and because a lot of comic book store people love Lloyd, a lot of comic book stores are getting this and are going to have it. We're going to be doing signings where I'm going to be doing both Daisy Goes to the Moon and Lloyd Kaufman interviews. Like I said, I'm in the Denver area, so of course we'll be doing Mile High and places like that.
Great.
But yeah, get it from your local bookstore, but then still give me a review on Amazon so that we can get the recommendation algorithms up. It's so important. Please, with me, with any of your friends, anyone who has buddies who are writers, who are authors, the best way you can help them out, even more than buying books from them, is to do reviews, positive reviews for their books on Amazon. I always tell people that. I always tell my author friends that. As there really are numbers that get triggered. It's disgusting. It's horrible. It's a video game. It's stupid. Big companies pay for people to do this. But the reality is, after you get to a certain number on Amazon, it starts kicking up the recommendation algorithm. So we all just got to play that game. So buy
you just need you just need to know the rules of the game and how it works and everything, and adapt to the system. No, absolutely, man.
It's just
excellent.
Look, and like I said, I don't feel bad saying it like that. I don't feel bad. Quote unquote cheating in that regard, because they do it way worse. Again, that's why you see sometimes these books come out and you're like, how is there 2,500 reviews for this book? It just came out yesterday and I don't know anybody who got it. And it's because they're paying for it. I mean, it's just like with followers on Twitter or anything else. So, I just tell people, support your local bookstore, support your local comic book store, but please still do reviews on Amazon. It helps to do reviews elsewhere on BarnesandNoble.com, et cetera, Goodreads and all that too. But Amazon is really the big one. And other publishers look at them and say, well, how'd you do on Amazon? So the better you help me get going on Amazon, the more I can do other projects. And I would like to keep doing other projects too. So hate to be that honest. Lloyd's the same way, as we said.
Yeah.
Got to be a truth teller here. Support your local bookstore. Still do reviews on Amazon.
Well, people come to Word Balloon. I know aspiring writers and artists as well to get these kind of pro tips. So I think that's great. Yeah. Again, everybody, from Fantagraphics, Daisy Goes to the Moon, adapted from Mathew Klickstein's original story, but it's adapted and illustrated by Rick Geary. And then, of course, this fantastic book coming from. Which University Press again, Matthew?
It's University Press of Mississippi. It's Lloyd Kaufman interviews, and yeah, it'll be paperback, hardcover, and ebook. The hardcovers are more like text, are done as kind of textbooks, and so they're for larger, bigger sales, so they're more expensive. So regular consumers are going to probably want to get the paperback, which is a more normal price, like I think $25.
Sure.
The hardcovers are going to be like $100 or something like that, but that's because they're used. It is a university press, so they're going to be used as part of curriculum. And let's hope they do. I would love this book to end up as part of curriculum at these colleges stuff. And, they have classes on, as we all know, Star Wars and Simpsons and Taylor Swift, even at places like Berkeley and Harvard and Stanford now. Let's have, a class on Troma. Let's have a class on Lloyd Kaufman. Yeah. By the way, anybody listening or watching Word Balloon right now, I'm more than happy to come and talk at these colleges. I'm more than happy to come and talk at some of these places. I've done it all over the country. It's one of the things I love doing. And I can tell you right now that with the right kind of deal or whatnot, and, probably a lot less than you think, you could probably get Lloyd Kaufman out there too, or we can at least do, maybe some remote things or something like that. We're actually talking right now with Alamo Draft House and a few other partners and possibly doing some special screenings and stuff coming up in the new year. And you can, again, find all that stuff on my website, www.mathewklickstein.com. Please always remember, I hate to have to keep bringing this up, just the way that it is. My name really is spelled with one T, Matthew with one T, and Klickstein with a K. I'm sure John will have it up there. But point being, would love to talk about these things in a college setting. Would love to talk about these things at some of the other organizations. I've done Jewish community centers. I've done churches. I've done synagogues. I've done all different kinds of, youth groups and colleges, sure, museums, obviously film festivals and comic libraries. John, you yourself, were nice enough to connect me to the one in Connecticut. That was a lot of fun.
Terrific concert.
So happy to do that. And I could say that Lloyd would probably be up to, if not do it remotely, maybe even do it in person. So anybody listening who'd want something like that, we're up for it.
Sounds great. And MathewKlickstein.com is the place to go to contact you?
Yeah, MathewKlickstein.com, MathewKlickstein.com. Just feel free to look me up. Believe it or not, there really is another Mathew Klickstein in the world who's got 2 T's in his name. He is a musician in Brooklyn. He is not I. Both to kind of keep distinguished from him. But also, I don't know what to say. It's spelled like that on the birth certificate. It is Matthew with 1 T, and it's just how it's spelled. So, so that's what it's got to be for the website. But,
sounds good, man. Beautiful. Congrats. Both interesting projects coming up in February. Stay in touch because I'm sure you'll have something new that we'll want to talk about in the months ahead.
Coming out to Chicago, as I said, and I'd love to meet up with you again.
Absolutely, man. And all the best during the holidays. I hope you and your family have a good one. Yeah. And I was happy to have this conversation tonight. Everybody, in about 90 minutes at midnight Eastern time and 9 p.m. Pacific time, Brian Bennis will be joining me for a little holiday chat. We might have a special guest as well, but it's just us hanging out. It's holiday week and stuff. And also I'm like, hey, man, I turned 60. The least you can do for my birthday is do a word balloon before the end of the year, for Christ's sake. And he's doing it, so that's great. We're going to just have a fun, casual conversation. I hope you will join us. Until next time, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.